Hi, David. Can you hear me?
Yes, made contact at last.
We have. Lovely to speak with you. So, well, glad we were able to catch up at last. I guess a few of the things that I wanted to talk about was just, I guess, really getting your recollections of as one of the pioneers of the Cape Wrath Trail. You know, how you first sort of came across it, because I mean, it didn't really exist in the way that we understand it now, or it was certainly a lot less established when you first sort of set about it. So I guess that's as good a place to start as any, if that's all right.
Well, I mean, I'll go for broke and say, look, it didn't exist at all in any way whatsoever until I decided to do it. I mean, obviously, people had been walking all over the Highlands since time immemorial. Locals, crofters, farmers, hunters, that sort of people had walked all over the Scottish Highlands for hundreds of years. And in recent times, then hobbies and pastimes and other things began to take place, and people went walking for fun. And then again, people will have walked the terrain that the Cape Wrath Trail goes through. But I don't think anybody had ever set out from Fort William with the idea of doing a non-stop walk and documenting it as we went to Cape Wrath. I think I was the first to have that idea, or the first to put it into practice anyway. So I'm claiming a bit of ownership of.
Well, no, fair enough.
Of the Cape Wrath Trail.
Absolutely. And I guess, where did you get the idea then? You know, what sort of crystallized the thought of going from Fort William in your mind?
It was doing the West Highland Way. I walked the West Highland Way. I haven't got this date in my tongue tip, but around 1990, I walked the West Highland Way with a friend, a colleague, and fellow photographer. And when we arrived at the end point, which is Fort William, I wanted more, and I wanted wilder. I'd enjoyed the West Highland Way very much, but having already become an experienced Nepalese trekker, I wanted something a bit wilder than the West Highland Way.
Yeah.
It's very suitable for lots of people who don't want wilderness, who want to be in a bed every night, who want want a cooked meal every night. That's fine for them, and it's a lovely walk, but it just left me wanting more. So having got home after finishing the West Highland Way, I got all my Ordnance Survey maps out and started to think about what I could do to follow on. And the idea quickly germinated, and the maps fell into place, and the idea of the Cape Wrath Trail was well and truly born. It wasn't long after having the thought that I set about doing the logistics. I realized that walking 200 miles, never calling in at a hotel or a B&B or a shop or anything, but walking as if in wilderness for 20 days, I would have to make some good plans for how to do that. And so I set about planning the logistics of the walk. Things like, facts like the average human diet weighs 2 pounds of food per day, 2 pounds of uncooked food per day. So I estimated the walk would take 20 days. That would be 40 pounds of food. I also estimated I'd shoot 100 rolls of film. That would be 20 pounds of film, medium format film. So you add that onto a 38-pound load of clothing, cooking gear, photographic gear, and all the rest of it, sleeping gear. It was just impossible. I'd be carrying 80 pounds, and I knew I couldn't do that. So I had to set something up.
So how did you? So I'm guessing you had some sort of support infrastructure in place when you first did it, because I mean, I guess we'll come on to some of the photography side of it in a bit. But did you have some sort of points that you'd sort of prearranged to pick up food and what have you?
I didn't have anyone I knew, but there were, though I didn't intend to use them, there were hotels dotted about the West Highlands and the North Highlands, and I could use them for one thing. I allowed myself to send them, to speak to them first, of course, and arrange this, but I would post a parcel to them, which they would hold for me till I called and got it. And there were 3 or 4 hotels, all of whom very kindly agreed to do this. In the parcel was a week's roughly supply of food, a week's supply of film, and the makings of another parcel. So what I did was I put my used film in the wrappings that came in the parcel that had held state. Am I making this clear?
Yeah,
the
absolutely.
hotel got a parcel, and inside is the makings of another parcel. My film went without makings, left it with money to be posted, and I went on my merry way with the food that the first parcel had contained.
Yeah, that makes sense.
That happened.
No, I was just going to say, I remember doing the same with sending various paper maps back home. I took some prepaid envelopes with me, and I remember you find post boxes in the middle of nowhere sommes and sort of stuffing map fill in there. Go on, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, sorry. I'd forgotten, but my package included maps of the next section as well. And the section I'd already walked went back to London, because I was living in London at the time. So I was carried as little as I possibly could get away with. It really was just a change of clothing, some waterproofs, a sleeping bag, sleeping pad, and my camera gear. Everything else was kept to an utter minimum.
And had you, obviously the photos from that became the book, which I think many people listening to this will have read, and, was certainly the inspiration, one of the inspirations to me, sort of when I first got to hear about it. At that stage, was a book in your mind, or did that come at a later date?
I think the idea was from the start to publish a book. I didn't have a publisher on board, but I fully intended to make a book of the new walk, Cape Wrath Trail. And I had some sort of further thoughts that one day I might walk the whole walk from Glasgow to Fort William and make that an integral. I never got around to doing that. I'm so sad about that. That would be a wonderful walk.
Yeah.
Follow the route of the West Highland Way with the route of the Cape Wrath Trail. It would be a fantastic walk.
So maybe if you can talk a little bit about, I guess, so we're talking, this must have been the early 90s, the photographic equipment that you're carrying then is not as compact as it is today. So maybe you could talk a little bit about how you went about, covering the distance with quite heavy kit and also getting the shots that you need, because I guess you couldn't wait around for days on end to get these shots. So how did you sort of balance the need to cover the ground with the need to sort of take the right shot and the right light and what have you?
You hit on a vital point there, which is that by definition, doing the walk across a succession of wildernesses, I would be somewhere wild and lonely at every dusk and every dawn. And you used to be taught as a junior photographer that the best times to take photographs were two things: 2 hours before dusk and 2 hours after dawn. Well, I was automatically going to be in those two places at those two times every day of the walk. Things fell into place in that sense. Also, the Highlands are spectacular wherever you go. They're not necessarily huge uplifts of naked rock, but the Scottish Highlands has a feel and a style all of its own. It's unique in the world. I'm not going to say it's better than anywhere else, but it's unique. It has its own character, its very own particular character, and that's a great help to a photographer. Didn't have great luck with the weather on that first walk. I had 3 days of heavy falling snow around the 12th of May, when I was in the region of, say, Achiltibui to Achfari. It was not only heavy snow, but it was dark at midday. It was like a January day almost. At one point, I was walking through 6 inches of deep, wet snow.
And what time of year was that?
That was May 1993.
Which I think just reinforces the point that, any time of year, really. I mean, that even in spring, you can get some pretty inclement weather. Even in midsummer, you can get some pretty inclement weather. Yeah.
The Scottish mountains can get snow in any month of the year. Down in the valleys, in the straths, not so much. But yes, it's always I wouldn't say it's a danger or a risk, but it's always a potential lurking there that you might get snow at any time. The weather turns to the north and whips a cold wind down from the Arctic. We can get snow any time.
And so you did a couple. How many trips in total did it take to get all of the pictures that you wanted for what became the book that followed on from that?
I think I did 7 visits.
Gosh, that many, I didn't realise that.
Yeah, having put a lot of effort into it, say after the first 2 or 3 visits, I thought, I'm not going to do things by halves. There are still areas that have not got sufficient quality and depth of in terms of the photographs, and so I kept going back until I was completely satisfied that there were no make-weights, that every picture would fight its own corner, be useful and worthwhile. And I wouldn't use any second-class material. I'm not sure how successful I was in that. But I would say one thing. I've just been waiting for 5 o'clock to come around. I was reading some bits of the Cape Wrath Trail. And to say this a bit shamefacedly, it's a surprisingly good read. It was about the first thing I ever wrote, just about. And it's quite entertaining. I was surprised.
You shouldn't be surprised, David. It's a fantastic book, and I remember for many years, or certainly a couple of years, that was really my reference. And I think it was not just the text. Not just the photos. Obviously, they are very beguiling and enticing to someone who's sort of like myself, keen on those things. So they really draw you in. But actually, as you say, it's a really good read as well. So
I'm glad you think so. I'm pleased with that.
I was just going to ask, really, then, over those 7 trips, what was the hardest photo to take? Was there a particular photo that you were really after that eluded you and that you eventually got? Was there any that eluded you altogether? Do you think what area or what photo caused you the most sort of angst, I suppose, as a photographer?
I'm sure there must have been some that I never got to my own satisfaction, but I'm afraid 28 years of the passage of time, I don't remember the disappointments too well.
Well, that's good. Good to forget those.
Means a lot to me. It's a very romantic picture, and I climbed that day. I wasn't walking the walk. I was looking for viewpoints to look down on the walk. I climbed Archival and Foindivan with my son, which pleased me tremendously because he was never, and still isn't, interested in the great outdoors in that sense. He's very sporty, but he's not a walker, he's not a climber. But he came with me on Archival and Foindivan, and I got, as we came down off the summit of Foindivan, I got what became the cover picture of the Cape Wrath Trail book. So that means a lot to me, that particular one.
I think, certainly speaking from my own experiences, I'm old enough to remember, obviously just about using film and, film cameras and what have you. But photography's become, I suppose, in a way so easy. We all have these phones where you can take pictures, but I'd be really interested to hear a little bit about the process that you went through for taking those photos, and maybe, just I suppose how you actually went about it, because clearly they're not sort of point and shoot photos. There's quite a deal of setting up, and as a landscape photographer of many years, what was your sort of process for capturing those as a photographic kind of element?
Well, one of the things that has changed tremendously from those days is that you were very limited in how many shots you could fire off at any particular subject. You had to try and get it right almost first time. There was no bracketing and, shoot this, that, bit of this and a bit of that, and that thing over there, I'll conclude that. No, I'll shoot wide angle. No, I'll shoot long lens. You didn't do all that. You were only going to take 1 or 2 or at most 3 frames, because every time you press the shutter, it costs money. And if you're somewhere where your film is limited, more important than costing money is it eats into your film stocks. And it's not like digital where you can shoot endlessly and try every different lens and do every variation under the sun. You had to know what you were doing. I don't want this to sound critical of an entire generation of digital shooters, but I think there has been a deal of de-skilling involved in photography. You don't need the knowledge and the skills that we had to have. But this is 28 years ago we're talking, 1993. You had to know what you were doing. You had to understand what film could do and what it couldn't do. It couldn't handle bright highlights, for example. And so you were slow, thoughtful, use a tripod as often as you could be bothered, because it guaranteed you a sharp picture. And again, I shoot handheld, now I'm shooting digitally, and I shoot at very long shutter speeds because I can take as many as it needs to get a sharp one. But I couldn't do that then. I had the first one or the second one had to be sharp, no matter what was going on, because that's all I could shoot. As I said, maximum 3. It's not as if I was on a commercial shoot. That's different. If I was working for a client, I would have a budget and I could use as much film as I wanted. But on a private venture like this, and out of touch with civilization for 17 days, as I was, you had to be very careful with what you shot and what you didn't shoot. Your choice had to be good to start with.
Yeah, I think that's as someone who's probably spent most of their life, taking digital photos, it's very easy to forget, isn't it, that we don't have to live with the consequences of taking a bad photo because we can just sort of delete it and try again, or so yeah. I can sort of see that, absolutely.
Well, I was just going to say, I take full advantage of digital technology now, and I'm really glad that it's happened, because it's been a great thing for photography. It's enabled me and every other photographer to extend their repertoire, to do things they didn't think possible before, to be experimental. It's wonderful. I love digital. Also, it puts all the power back in the photographers. As far as colour is concerned, we were in the grip of the film producers, Kodak, Fuji, and so on. We were in their control. They decided what our pictures would look like because they manufactured the film. Now you can give pictures any look you want because you are in control of your image, not some manufacturer. It's a great change, and very much for the better. Digital colour photography has come of age in the digital age.
That's a fascinating point, because I think that's often underappreciated, isn't it? That control, and also I suppose the lack of control that reliance on film had to a certain extent.
Yes.
But I wonder, as a photographer, I know a lot of people who walk the trail. We all have handheld cameras of varying degrees of quality. Leaving the technology aside, as a sort of professional career-long landscape photographer, what advice could you give us amateurs for taking better landscape photos? Because I certainly, I would appreciate it from my own point of view, and I know we all aspire to sort of take better pictures. Are there any sort of things that people can do to sort of, regardless of whatever they have in their pocket, to sort of just take better compositions?
Yes, I think what you have to do, and back in the day, we only had a viewfinder. We didn't have a monitor on the back of the camera. So this goes for both film cameras looking through the viewfinder and digital cameras looking at the monitor on the back of the camera. You have to examine what you're pointing the camera at. Don't just say, "Oh, that looks nice," bang. You have to examine what you're looking at. You have to just make sure the elements come together. It's very difficult to describe what the mental process is. But, for example, I'm very fond of triangular or diagonal compositions, where a line crosses the screen crosses the image from upper left, let's say, to lower right, or upper right to lower left, and it carries your eye with it, so you place the things along that line. It sounds crazy, but it works. Simplify, simplify, simplify. Don't try to pack everything in. Choose an element of the landscape and concentrate on it.
I think that's great advice.
That's all I can say, really. Very hard to describe the process.
I think if you could distill it that easily, then we wouldn't have people with the skills and abilities that you have doing what you do.
There's also a kind of practice makes perfect thing going on here as well. I shot that 28 years ago, or started shooting the Cape Wrath Trail 28 years ago. I'm a much better photographer now than I was then, because I've had 28 more years of doing it. And it's just as simple as practice makes perfect. As long as you keep working at it, you will improve, both by looking at your successes and especially by looking at your failures. Why did they fail? Why did you think a picture was there but you failed to get it?
I suppose, going back to your point, in a way, digital has made it, the cost of failing less less. So, you can afford to fail more often, and you can afford to learn through failing without sort of there being a cost of having to develop all those images that are failures and what have you. So it encourages experimentation, I guess.
One of the great things, if you're shooting from, no, I'm not talking about beyond the Cape Wrath Trail, but me here in Killin shooting near home, up the Plenty Hills near Killin, and wonderful countryside. I can take a shot out in the countryside around Killin and be back in my office printing it out 20 inches long 20 minutes later. That kind of feedback can be so beneficial, and it's something we did not have in the film era. First of all, the manufacturer gave you a film which predetermined what the color would look like. Then you took the film to a lab which processed it, might well and did sometimes make a mess of processing it. All your colors come out magenta, let's say, instead of the full spectrum. All that's gone, and you have this amazing feedback. The feedback loop is so short. You take a picture, you run it back to your house, take the memory card inside the computer, fire up Photoshop and print it. It's amazing. And I love it. And I do lots and lots of printing because I have always loved printing, and I used to love being in the darkroom making black and white prints. Still miss that to some extent. Probably more of a printmaker than a photographer these days.
Well, that, of course, is what I want to talk about in just a second. But I just wonder, before we move on to that, whether there's any, going back to the route, whether from all your journeys along the Cape Wrath Trail, you developed, was there a section or sections that you sort of developed a particular affinity for? Were there certain bits of the trail that you came to sort of love more than any others?
Yes, I would say that the West Sutherland, from just into West Ross, that coastal section from, let's say, from Ullapool, to take it as a landmark, from Ullapool north to Kinlochbervie, just the most wonderful stretch of countryside. Nobody who loves the outdoors could fail to love Coigach and Assynt, as it's called. A wonderful stretch of countryside. I always think you climb up to any of the summits and the others around you rear out of the accompanying bog like prehistoric monsters. There are no mountain ranges in Assynt and Coigach. There are individual mountains standing alone, and it's just wonderful. Can't be there often enough.
Yeah, it's incredible country, isn't it? And I think that's probably one of the most remote stretches, isn't it? There's days there where you're at least a day and a half away from a road, let alone civilization. So that's certainly where I felt, most in the wild lands, I think. And that's probably part of the attraction. I guess, one of the main reasons we're catching up today is the project we've been working on for quite some months now. And I think where this came from really was a kind of a shared desire to sort of bring some of these fantastic images from your book and make them available to people, whether they've walked the trail or aspire to walk the trail as kind of print. I guess we could start by talking about some of the images that are available, because we had a hard job, didn't we, selecting the ones. I think we aimed for one originally and then gave that up, and then I think we've ended up with sort of 14 or 15 because neither of us could sort of bear to reduce the number. But I think the sort of 15 or so really, I guess from my perspective, capture probably the span of the trail and different lights and what have you. But what are your thoughts on the selection?
I'm now quite pleased with what we've ended up with. It was difficult. It was difficult trying to, when we were working with a lower number of prints, I just found it so hard to capture the essence of the Cape Wrath Trail in literally a handful of images. It's so long and so varied, and there's so much to look at in the 205 miles that I just couldn't come to terms with it. As I looked through my collection of images from that stretch of countryside, more and more kept pushing themselves forward and saying, no, take me, the images really spoke to me, and I couldn't say no. Added them into the selection we were making. But you say we considered 14 or 15. We did, of course, but beyond that, I probably seriously looked at about 25 images, and the 14 or 15 of what came through my net.
Yeah, well, I think we've ended up with a really good selection. And you talked a little bit about, your love of printing and the process you go through. And I just think it's going to be such a nice thing for people to potentially be able to treat themselves to in terms of these prints. So I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about the process that you'll go through in printing these images if people want them, hopefully, as they'll prove popular. So how do you go about printing them? What can people sort of expect?
What I did for this project was slightly different to my normal, which is that I decided I would consider a wider range of printing material than is my norm. I have a kind of a habit, a printing habit, everything Epson. There is some reasoning behind it that Epson, if they manufacture the ink and the paper and the printer, they should really go well together, and that is in fact the case. But I did consider several other manufacturers' paper and did tests on several different and sometimes more expensive paper than the Epson paper which I normally use. After every experiment, I came back to preferring my long-standing Epson paper. I've been using it for 20 years, and I just know very well how it performs. I know what my picture will look like on it. That was not the case with newer papers, or rather papers that were new to me. I didn't have that knowledge. I didn't have that control, and so failures were much more common. And every time I had a failure on a different and perhaps more expensive paper, it pointed me back to Epson and enhanced matte, which is the paper I use. I actually prefer its surface to any other paper that I tried. It's a close-run thing, but I prefer the color as well. And there's nothing I can give at that point except make sure that it's the best I can do. And it so happens that the best was to use Epson paper, Epson ink, and my good old Epson printer. Well, I've been meaning to send you a whole box of prints for a long time, and I'll get round to that eventually. Excuse me for not doing so earlier.
Well, it's, you've been kind enough to send me, some of the early samples, and I can definitely attest to the fact that it's just a beautiful matte paper, and just the images that, if people have got the book, they'll recognize some of the images. They just look absolutely beautiful on that.
Sadly, some of the images in the book are no longer available. I mean, the passage of 28 years has taken its toll. Just on some of the film, for example, somebody got attacked by molds and that kind of thing. I lost some important images through that. And the scans that were done for the book, they were done commercially, of course, and though they're perfectly good scans, they're only good for the size they're printed at in the book. You can't make big prints from them. You can only make book-sized prints.
So for these, you've gone back to the original. Would it be the negative or the...
It's a positive, a transparency, or as they say, a slide.
And these were made 30 years ago, were they? These original?
Yeah, yes. And I scanned almost everything we were using as our prints has been scanned from the original piece of film, except a few which, as I say, were lost due to an attack of mold. On a drawer in which I'd been keeping film turned out to be not hermetically sealed, and some mold got in from somewhere. In fact, all the images we're using to make our prints from have been scanned from original pieces of film. It does mean that some I would wish to use were not available. We're okay with what we've got.
I think that hopefully people will appreciate the sort of almost the link back in history to, where the Cape Wrath Trail, was originated, and those original photos, and the fact that these prints are actually from the original positive films. It's lovely, isn't it? It's so nice to be able to do. That's an important
point that I think for just to get an integral feel for the whole thing is that, yes, these pictures are from the first walk, so we've kind of come full circle.
We have indeed. And I suppose David, it's been, a great pleasure and privilege working with you on this, and then just really quite excited and, feel privileged to sort of be able to do this with you. But I guess just to bring things to a close, did you, this might be a hard question to answer, but I'll ask it anyway. Nearly 30 years ago now, did you, maybe not on that first walk, but having walked the West Highland Way, and did you have a sense then that the Cape Wrath Trail would become as sort of highly regarded and a well-respected a route as it is today? Did you have any sort of sense of what it might become?
I really didn't, because one thing which might have had me think otherwise was the fact that even when I walked the West Highland Way, it was very, very quiet. You did not meet other walkers. Doing the walk, the Cape Wrath Trail, for the first time, in the whole 205 miles, I met two people. The only other people I spoke to were at the hotels where I went to collect my parcels. But whilst walking, I met two people in the whole length of 205 miles. And so I had no inkling that this would become, an international hit, which it has done. I'm very, very pleased.
And I was just to finish, I was wondering whether all these years on, there are any sort of really strong memories or things from those walks that really, you think back and they jump out at you.
Two things come to mind, but neither were from the first walk. They were from subsequent trips when I was filling in holes in the coverage of photography. I was charged by a stag in the hills above Achfari, West Sutherland. I came around the corner of a hill and face to face with a herd of stags. And one of them, they were all lying down, and one of them immediately got up and started running towards me. It's what's called a switch. A switch is a stag which only has single blade antlers. And they use them like knives. They know they can stab. This thing was charging for me. It jumped a fence, so I knew it meant business. Luckily, I was standing on a path which had kind of fist-sized boulders, and I picked up as many as I hand in the crook of my left hand. And when the deer was within throwing distance, I threw two of these stones at him. The second one took him full on the chest, turned. I think that was maybe the most dangerous moment of my life.
Gosh,
because there's no way you can run away from a 600-pound animal which runs at 40 miles an hour. No. So if I didn't manage to turn him with my stones, I might be dead.
That's not one you're going to forget. You mentioned there was another one.
Yes, the other one is completely different. There's a lovely open bothy called Chenaval in Strathna-Shelga, which is the Valley of Hunting, in the hills south of, I'm going to forget the name of the Loch Broom, which Ullapool sits on the north side of. In the hills of Dundonald, there's a valley called Strathna-Shelga and a lovely old shooting lodge, which is now an open bothy.
It's beautiful. I know it well. Yeah.
The second time I stayed there, about 10 or 11 at night, I heard footsteps outside. Two guys came in, and we chatted, and they said, what's your name? I said, Dave Paterson. Oh, Dave Paterson, I've heard of you. You're a photographer. Yeah, that's right. He said, I've seen your book on the West Highland Way. I said, did you buy it? He said, no, I looked at every page of the book in the bookshop. Why would I buy it? And there's the rub for a photographer trying to make money by publishing.
Well, there we are. Well, David, listen, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, and even more of a pleasure kind of cooking up this project. And I feel certain this is something people will be really interested in.
It's all been a great pleasure for me as well.
I think we could both probably wax lyrical about the Cape Wrath Trail for many hours on end. But yeah, thank you so much.
It's been a great pleasure for me as well.